Hey, welcome everybody. This is Bill Fanning. Glad you guys could be here, and we're about to get going. I'm just going to give it a moment or two to let other people log in, and then we can kind of begin our discussion, and excited for our conversation today. Yeah, it's 1:02, so let's get going. So today's discussion, which really is just an open discussion around the superpowers, and I think that's an awesome way to present it, that individuals bring to the work community of our companies. And how do we harness those superpowers in an effective way to really make everybody perform as best they can, feel as included and as belonging as they can, and make it an enjoyable experience. With me is Roy Baladi. Roy and I had a great opportunity. I'm going to shut my screen share off. Roy and I had a great opportunity to work together previously at Smart Recruiters, and very excited that he has the opportunity to join us. Where I was very inspired by Roy because he was at Smart Recruiters and stepped out of that role to take on what I think is a really interesting platform called Jobs for Humanity. And I really wanted to talk a little bit about that, the purpose behind it, and the way that we focus and embrace diverse team members. And I'll give you a brief example of why this is important to me in my personal life. I don't know if I've shared this before, but my youngest daughter is on what they call on the spectrum. You would know it by talking to her, but her brain functions differently. And so one of the things that's happened recently in the last year is she got called out in school for cheating. And the reality is she wasn't cheating. When she does math, she does it in her head. That's her superpower. She can look at a complex algebraic geometry, whatever it is, and just noodle on it for a minute and then write the answer down. And the teachers in her school accused her of cheating because she never wrote her work down on her homework or on tests. And I had to go in and talk to them and update her IEP, which is a document that allows special requirements for people in school. But it just showed me how somebody's superpower. And for me, I look at her because as a former infantry officer, math and I passed in the middle of the night. But watching her, it just blows my mind. Like she can look at something that I can't even, takes me a minute to comprehend. And by the time I comprehend the problem, she writes the answer down. And so that was a great example for this discussion around where we see superpowers potentially not being honored or embraced the way they could. And so, Roy, what I just wanted to start with that because that's one of the reasons I was excited for this conversation. But maybe take a minute and just kind of introduce yourself to everybody and share a little bit of your background, and then we can kind of start talking more on topic.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to ask, do you generally record conversations? So I just want to ask in case you generally do and you do want to record the convo for anyone who can't make it.
Yes,
Um,
this is actually I believe uh being recorded both locally and on the
oh,
cloud.
wow. Okay, cool. Uh, I am Roy. I grew up in Lebanon, and I grew up in the actually middle of the Civil War. I was born in 84, and then the Civil War started from 75, ended up in 1990. A lot of stories there from 0 to 6 years old. But the formative period of my life was when my parents split up. I was 8. It was in 1992. And I did everything I could to bring them back together. And obviously, I did all I could, but it was hard for them to reconcile differences. But there was one thing that they had, one project that they had worked on together that they stayed and collaborated on. And that became a shining beacon in my life. It kind of guided me unconsciously. And it gave me a lot of respect to people who follow social impact and do things for others and serve others. Is that they were building an orphanage together with a group of people. It was like 8 or 9 people. And then they kept on collaborating through it. Um, I was raised by a Palestinian refugee. actually, who was helping my dad, was a single dad. And at 17, I left to the US, and every single role I've taken has built social impact into it. I've looked for social impact through it. When Bill and I worked at Smart Recruiters, I used to volunteer. I volunteered in prisons at Pelican Bay State Prison in California. It's a supermax prison on the border of Oregon and California. And there I got to meet men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s who had done terrible things, but they had spent so many years and within that program have really gotten to identify what it is inside themselves that they had done wrong, taken full accountability, and also learned to forgive and understand the person who had trespassed them as well, but also to get to a place in their lives where they can get past racial lines. They can get past within you know, this gang versus that gang. And it became quite abundant when they started to get transferred from prison and the alliances changed. But then when it was time for them to get out, because through the program, it's a lot of like self-love and empathy program, it was just impossible for them to get work. Within my cohort of volunteers that was helping them was the president at Uber Pay, Apple Pay, CEO of Smart Recruiters. I mean, you'd think you've got the cream of the crop of people who can try to help them find jobs. And then the solution was always like, who do you know? There's an executive admin position. Can someone take this person in? Then we'd start to invite returning citizens, so formerly incarcerated individuals, into events with recruiters where they start to talk about their superpowers. Like, I mean, what are you looking for when you're a recruiter? You look for empathy. So we'd ask, that's one of the things: grit, empathy, timeliness, hard work. You'll show up on top. Like, these are the soft skills on top of the hard skills. So we ask in a room, please share an example of resourcefulness. And there goes Dana, who was, while incarcerated, 25 years had been in prison. And he realized that a lot of men there had diabetes and would die from diabetes. And realized that there was no program there in this prison to help them cope or sidestep or find, cures and just survive this thing. So he's put together a program within with all the resources available at that prison, and then passed across, like sold it, quote unquote, across gangs for the good of everybody. Well, that's amazing when it comes to sales, when it comes to empathy, when it comes to resourcefulness. And that's a superpower, let alone other superpowers that you'll find when you're incarcerated, such as extreme timeliness, such as when you're giving a second chance where you can make a job, where you can earn a living that's not like we can earn as much legally than illegally, then you're going to take it and grab onto this opportunity. But that, when you try to share that, a recruiter looking at their resume is going to see a gap in the resume. A job seeker is going to try to talk about that gap, is going to talk about, they're going to be apologetic about it, and they won't know how to turn these into skills. Then we moved on to the next skill. What about empathy? And then one would share an example that would show extraordinary empathy and self-sacrifice. And I'm sure that, Bill, from your own experience, you're probably going to go through so many of these stories. So a lot of people who have gone through, the proverbial fire or really tough time in their lives have gained skills in order to cope because they had to. And those skills are often poorly translated. This is going to be the heart of this conversation. We're going to go community by community, but I'm going to pause here. After having volunteered with men in prisons, actually yesterday, now I'm in Europe after COVID, and I was at a prison yesterday at Pentonville, singing in a choir, getting a sense of what the experience is like here for men and women in prison. But Bill and I worked at Smart Recruiters, and I've been in the recruitment tech space for some time. And then when one day I heard that in Lebanon, the entire country went, like all banks declared bankruptcy simultaneously. And from that moment on, every citizen of that 4 million person country, or 6 if you include refugees, so because I haven't gotten citizenship, lost access to all their money, became bankrupt. Corporations, individuals, everybody, adults, kids, anybody,
Yeah.
everybody. Imagine that, like you can't go to the bank online, in person, ATMs don't work, your cards don't work. So friends of mine and I started an initiative called Jobs for Lebanon, which is a campaign to the global Lebanese diaspora, because there's so many Lebanese worldwide, to say, hey, please, if you've got a job, hire a Lebanese, they just lost it. And that call was really well taken. And so this jobsforlebanon.com became the largest job site in the country, placed more than 1,000 people, all for free. And it still is as of today. Then COVID hit, then the explosion and destroyed everything in the port of Beirut, and I was caught in the middle of it, and I had my fuck it moment. Sorry, that's recorded. We can edit this out. But that
Yeah.
that
Beep.
was yeah, that's the right HR term for it. And
Yeah.
I told myself, all right, that's just, I really want to build jobs for humanity, and started the job site for, the returning, so you go to returning citizens.jobs, then blind.jobs, and refugee.jobs, and single mom.jobs, and all other jobs for humanity.com. So 10 job sites, 10 training programs for employers on how to identify those skills, how to identify, offer inclusive interview process, onboarding process, reasonable accommodations, good conversations with them on top of the site where you can post a job. And then offering free job coaching to job seekers, where anybody, even anybody within the talk community is welcome to take that training. We can offer it, and then offer, coach to job seekers. So if, by show of, mental hands with everybody here, how many of you have ever interviewed a blind person? How many of you have ever interviewed a deaf person? And so if you are in recruiting organization or leading a recruiting organization, if you haven't done that, because why would you have? Go with it, just chance it, the opportunity didn't show up. But wait a minute, things don't add up accounting wise when there are 300 million blind or low vision people worldwide, 50 million in the US, 7 million fully blind, and 450 million deaf or hard of hearing individuals worldwide. We've seen thousands of job seekers. How have we never come across one of them? No, where's the gap? How can they not come to us, get to us? And so this is the specialty where you can have a chance to meet them, get a chance to meet experts within our team on each community, and in doing so, have a stress-free, obligation-free opportunity to help them with their job search, because you're not hiring them within your org, so you don't have to ensure that your org is already accessible to them. But then this is a great way to put yourself in their shoes. And then that fast tracks you through the journey of full inclusion.
Roy, can I stop you there and ask you a question? Because I think it's really interesting to me. I mean, mathematically or statistically, you could say that the opportunity to interview somebody who has a vision challenge or a hearing challenge is pretty relevant, but yet I never have, and I've interviewed hundreds of people. So I'm wondering if culturally or process-wise, we've created barriers where people will not make that application effort, knowing that they have the vision challenge or the hearing challenge that's going to prevent them from being successfully interviewed. They've either had a poor experience in the past, they've been told not to do it. In the number of people that you've had the opportunity to interact with, have you walked away with any learning lessons in that area? That's very interesting to me, because I agree wholeheartedly on the math side that it would make a lot of sense for us to have those opportunities.
Yeah, and I love this conversation because we had a glimpse of, justice impacted, and now we switched over to a completely different world, but all within inclusion, and where oftentimes it doesn't really fall under the first thing we think of when we talk about DE&I. And because oftentimes it's under race, gender, whereas, if you're blind, you don't see race. And so mathematically speaking, you're talking about 750 million people worldwide. Maybe there's intersectionality between a person who's blind and deaf, or low vision and hearing loss, but 700 million, let's say, out of 8.2 billion people worldwide. So 9%. Roughly in theory, every 11 people you meet, one of them would fall under that. But it's not the case. It's not even every 11. It's not even every 100. So there are barriers. What are the barriers? Imagine, close your eyes. Everybody, close your eyes. I'm going to do the same just because we're having, it's an experiential thing. And actually, I'm going to give you the live version of it. But I'm just curious for you to experience what I'm about to say. And then I'm going to show you that experience seen from a blind person's perspective. Close your eyes and imagine yourself navigating through the internet. You go on the web. You can't use your mouse. So you're using the tab button. And every time you use the tab button, it reads what you're tabbing on. So it's going to say file, edit, search bar, and then you type what you want. And you hit enter. It says enter, opening this. Now, imagine that you found the job ad and you've hit apply. And then it's going to say name, email, phone number, experience, detail. And then education, and then certifications, and then check the privacy policy box. You're good. You hit submit, and then you don't hear anything. You're like, where am I? What's the next step? Now you can open your eyes. How frustrating can this fucking be if you're stuck at the submit button after having shared all your information? Every new job application, you have to do the same thing. So a lot of sites are not accessible, and it would be great to make them accessible, because by now, with the tech we have and the LLMs that exist, it's about damn time. And that's one of the reasons why you're going to have less than 1%, less than 1 per 11 being blind or deaf, or certainly and possibly less than 1%.
And Joanna made a good comment in chat that I think it's important. It's interesting to me because I think it's a great comment. It's important to have inclusive language on the job description and be intentional of where you're going and putting the job so you can reach these communities and let them know there's opportunities that would support them. But at the same time, the exercise you just went through with closing my eyes shows me, or makes me think that inclusive language is a good start, but a supportive process for these folks to come in and be successful to apply for the job. Because, I mean, let's face it, ghosting or the black hole of recruiting is something we hear about all the time. Like, I mean, imagine that black hole was created because the system would not respond to your individual needs. And the one you just identified, I think, is really interesting because, that's got to be beyond frustrating to be forced through a process that's been designed to not support you as a person.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I like just thinking about that is really challenging. So I'm curious, and if it, that's a great comment as well, that the nonprofit career centers that there are groups that support these folks and take the job and give them the opportunity to apply for it through intermediary technology, right? So,
Yes.
And the ASL translators during interviews are awesome as well. So I think that is a phenomenal step forward. I'm curious, as we think about superpowers, and just because we're talking a little bit about the applicant coming in, but I'm curious in our organizations or in thinking about our jobs, are we, and this is kind of for everybody, but do organizations today think about maximizing the unique abilities? Like if you're in that recruiting standpoint, are you thinking about the superpowers of the people that are applying and in the process and or technology to identify that?
Yeah. I'd love to dive into the superpowers.
Yeah.
And before getting into the superpowers, let me show you a superpower. So the transition between having closed your eyes and imagined everything. I'm going to share my screen now. And I would invite you to listen to this. So now you've got eyes open. You've got Jason, one of our colleagues. This is a bit part of the training, and he's sharing how he uses the internet.
I'm going to show you how to navigate the internet. I'm going to go to Google Chrome by pressing G.
G, Google Chrome, Control plus Alt plus G, 13
Enter
of
to
32.
open.
Enter. Address and search bar, edit A, Control plus L.
Takes me straight to the address and search bar. So I'm going to type in the short URL for Jobs for Humanities Blind and Visually Impaired campaign, which is blind.jobs.
BLIND period JOBS.
Enter.
Enter. Jobs for the blind, Google Chrome. Link about us. Page has 6 regions, 9 headings, and 34 links. There are 8 smart glance highlights on this page. Jobs for the blind navigation region. Visited link. Click logo to go to visited list of 7 items. Visited current page. Link home. Link about us. Link our network. Visited link
Training and coaching.
Link FAQs. Link collapsed menu sign in. Link. List end. Navigation region end. Main region. Heading level 1 jobs for the blind. Blank. Connecting visually impaired job seekers with welcoming employers across
There
the
we
world.
go. So that's how I navigate the internet with a screen reader. I'm going to close this.
Alt F4, folder view list view, Google Chrome.
So through this, Jason takes us how he uses Word, Excel, how to make documents accessible, so on and so forth. So what is interesting is that Jason obviously cannot see, relies on hearing. And so he's told me that, statistically, a blind person is able to hear and will listen to like the text to speech at up to 3x faster, at the speed 3x. Imagine reading a book at 3x the speed. I know we struggle with 1.5 and starting at 2, we really have to focus. But imagine being able to go to 3 and having a lot more concentration. Now that's a cheat code if you're doing some research. Right?
Yeah, that's amazing. Because I used to read books in college at 3 to 5 speed X, but I wouldn't retain anything. I just spin the pages and go, okay, done.
Yeah.
So that's it. What's interesting to me in that example you just showed is the simplicity of that enablement, right? So when we step back and we think about enabling people with these superpowers or their own unique needs, that screen reader seems to be a fairly simple addition to make somebody successful. I once had the ability to spend some time talking to a gentleman that had a number of physical limitations just by the way he was born. And one of the examples he used in talking to him is that it took him 60 to 90 minutes to tie a tie because of his arms and his vision. And he lived in Manhattan and he was trying to get a job. And every job that he went to, and he did 28 interviews. So he was sharing the math of what it took in terms of hours to get ready for these 28 interviews, which was hours per interview. And the one interview that worked, which was really interesting to me, and this has always stuck with me as a learning lesson, the one interview, which is EMC Music, the person who interviewed him was fundamentally different than everybody else. Instead of asking, what couldn't he do? That interviewer, that recruiter took the time to said, what do you need to be successful? And it was really amazing to me because he answered, I need a desk on the first floor, access to a handicap bathroom. And at the time, copiers and photocopiers were very, very common. I need a stool to reach up to the copier to use it. Those were the three things he needed to be successful. And he worked at that company for 18 years. That to me is just a mind-blowing shift. It sounds so simple, but it's a mind-blowing shift of perspective because he was a really, really talented person that just needed somebody to say, what do you need to bring those talents and be successful in my environment? And I love that thinking. And I've always taken that with me from that discussion because I found it so profound that somebody made such a simple but impactful change in the way they approached interviewing somebody that may need something unique.
Yeah, exactly. Think about also the level of patience that it takes. So now, if Jason is facing the internet and the page craps out on him, he's going to get frustrated, but he's going to move on to the next one. Or if you're in a conversation with Jason and then you leave Jason for a second, or you're ranting at Jason, and imagine you in that case are a client.
Mm-hmm.
He's your client success rep. And he's listening intently to everything you say, to the nuances, no scrolling on something else. And so he's got that level of focus and he's giving you his undivided attention. Would he not have a major superpower in comparison to the world where we have lost our focus? And wouldn't he gain a lot of appreciation, not because he's blind, but because he's paying attention? Well, yeah, client support, client success, anything client facing. But we might think that, oh, actually the person's blind, maybe not put them in front of a client. Well, you're missing out big time. And if a person is deaf because they lost the faculty of hearing, they can see well a lot better. What would that do for a design job if they're able to be so pixel perfect? And so if a lot of the communication that is being done can be done through an ASL interpreter, absolutely. But a lot of it is done through writing, through asynchronous communication. And the work I do with some of my colleagues, I have one colleague, we've met 3 times in 4 years of working together in like live conversations. Everything else is written and shared. This person has done all the front end sites of all our, like everything we have. And if it's beautiful, it's because sometimes you might even need a designer with him because he's just so good. And also because everything's so well documented that you're not missing anything. And even if you do have a 3 weeks that pass and that's not front of mind, everything's already there and very, very well documented. So you do have superpowers. But unfortunately, I was giving a reference check to a job seeker who got an offer. She is deaf. And she asked me to please not mention that she's deaf because she's afraid of being, having her offer rescinded. Another person who had their offer rescinded is a lady who's now, that's public because she's a TED speaker now, is Shelley Winner, who, while we were at Smart Recruiters, I've met her. She had just gone out of prison. She was 17 years old. She was when she was busted by the police, dealing drugs, was thrown in prison, and in the prison cell looked at her belly and realized, oh no, I'm pregnant. I fucked it up for myself, for my child. She was in it for longer than 9 months. So her child, the moment she was born, was taken away from her. And she lost that, I can't even call it, it's a much bigger word than pleasure. That of having her child in her arms. Actually, she had the opposite effect because of drugs. So that was her turning moment. And I've met every single person who's justice impacted, had that turning moment, and can tell you exactly where they were, what they were sitting on, will describe the room, will describe their thoughts, and will tell you this is the moment where I said, I'm turning a leaf. And then the harder work starts of actually having to adapt and break old habits and then never come back to them. So for her, when she got out of prison, she started to apply to jobs. And she's a hustler, she's a go-getter. And she got a job, she got an interview. She did well. She got a job offer. She did well. She got the background check. She failed. The employer was Microsoft. And she fought it. Eventually, Microsoft gave her the job because she strong-armed them. But what has that done? Shelley today is, or at least as of 2 years ago, was one of the top 1% who's invited to, that island where all the top other 1% make it, President's Club and whatnot. And in doing so, she is today, or at least was 2 years ago, Microsoft's worldwide #1 salesperson for all their tablets, crushing her quota because she was able to sell a much harder thing before, and she really wants this job, and that is a superpower. Now, obviously, Microsoft and many other organizations are advocates for second chances. But everybody goes through a learning phase, even, legal people, entities, corporations. Oh, nice. Thanks, Bill, for sharing.
Yeah, I just wanted everyone to see who Shelley was. So if you wanted to look at her background, that's her LinkedIn profile.
Now we've talked about superpowers for 3 things and for 3 communities. And I actually want to add a point to Evelise's comment. Having worked in a nonprofit career center that had an application that reads out websites for low vision blind clients, also having ASL translators during interviews, that's amazing. And it's not just amazing, that's to be expected in today's world where there are trillions of dollars spent on wars. You could definitely spend a couple of $1 billion in order to make 10% of your population more accessible. And governments do offer subsidies. So Jason, whose voice you were hearing, received $5,000 from the Department of Rehabilitation in California for his job when he started working, I think it was at Wayfinder Family Services, for the equipment that he needed to work. So don't fret as an organization and think that it's a much bigger piece just by listening to what Bill said about the person who had a physical mobility disability. And what I'm sharing about Jason, it's not much to make the office physically and digitally accessible. And B, the government will pay for a lot of it, at the very least 50%. Jobs for Humanity is a family of job sites that includes jobs for Lebanon, Humanity's main site, refugees, Neurodiverse, several other communities, and a world-class training program that's accredited by the Society of Human Resource Management and allows us to train employees at a company and build a relationship that's much deeper than a regular job board. All jobs are published on 30 additional outlets. In order to maximize their exposure, they end up in one talent database where candidates are ranked by best match and where we're able to extract the skills of each candidate and present them to the employer. Here's what happens behind the scenes. We use cutting-edge AI, large language models, both BARD and ChatGPT, in order to identify the key objective of the job, extract the skills and knowledge bases, then identify top 5 candidates for the role. For Jobs for Humanity's own hiring, we're looking to hire someone who's built a staffing agency in the past. It's automatically, in 30 seconds, identified Nina and several other candidates, and the AI generated a summary saying that she has 10 plus years in sales and recruitment, successfully identifying and securing clients and driving sales initiatives. When I look at her profile, I see that yes, in fact, she has 10 plus years of experience in HR, sales and marketing, has clients of $3+ million, smashed sales records, was a headhunter, and has strong sales and marketing skills. This ability to automatically pinpoint the best possible candidates in less than 30 seconds and be a companion to recruiters is something that is new to the market.
Yes. And that's good to know, because I think the more resources that we have at our disposal, the more we can expand the potential of bringing these folks into our community and giving them the ability to be successful. Because I have to think that, like, knowing, and not to overemphasize, but that's all my daughter wants, is to win. She wants straight A's. She's incredibly academically driven. And so she uses so the school is supporting and bringing the right tools to the table for her. Now, that's not an employment situation, but the culture, the thought process that goes behind that is incredibly important. I also think, Roy, and I don't know statistically the math behind this, but you've mentioned the number of people that, for example, have a vision or a hearing impairment. We, at a macro level, have already identified that the amount of employees that we need to hire, the skilled labor, the things that we need to bring in to continually support our business growth is challenged by the number of people coming into the workforce, right? Simply stated, we keep hearing there's more jobs than people. So wouldn't it make sense to expand the level of support we offer to make our ability to hire the right people simpler? I mean, and I think that's so the thought is, like, if we invest in these challenges and solving them with the right technologies, then we make our ability to fill positions with the right person more accessible.
Mm-hmm. Of course. There are communities that are larger and larger than what we're just blind. So blind, 300 mil, blind and low vision, 300 mil.
Mhm.
Deaf and hard of hearing, 450 million. Justice impacted, it's hard to know worldwide what it is, but the best stat I have is that there are 77 million people in the United States with a felony record, so they drop off the background check. And the US has 5% of the world's population, yet 25% of its incarcerated individuals. So let's say easily 150 million people. Now you also have, you mentioned that your daughter is neurodivergent. Well, a quarter to a third of the world's population is neurodivergent, myself included. And neurodiversity is a very misunderstood word. A lot of people don't even know the definition. And the reason for this is because it's a term coined in the 1990s. And so if you coin the term in the 1990s and things start to progress from there, we're like, oh, I might have this or that. And then you start to build subdivision from autism to Asperger's, to dyslexia, to dyspraxia, to dyscalculia, to ADHD, to Tourette syndrome, to many others. And then it's very easy to just say, okay, pause. I have a lot to learn. How on earth does this add up that we know so little of something that where a quarter to a third of the world's population is within that world? So, and since it was only coined in the 1990s, then you're going to have a lot of people who are within that world and would identify, but the knowledge hasn't gotten there, or there is stigma associated to it, or there is lack of knowledge. So let's just, at the very top, think about neurodiversity as neuro, brain, nerves, neurons, diversity, the diversity of the brain. So where you can have the people whose brain functions differently. Either they might be extremely sensitive to smell, or they could very sensitive to light or touch, or might have difficulty focusing on one thing and jumping from one thing to another, like me. And the reason why I'm calm now is because I meditated for 15 minutes before our talk, or else I would have been slightly more jumpy and you would have felt it in my energy, but it's still the same person. And then you've got people with Tourette syndrome who can have tics, or grunts, or can, cough unconsciously and involuntarily. It's a motor reaction, or have, certain movements, or head bobbing, or they can have a shoulder jerking, or can make a noise, or tapping. And then you're like, I'm trying to focus. And they know that you're paying attention to them. They know that you're looking at them and waiting for them to stop it, and they cannot control it. And with that comes a big feeling of shame because they can't control it. And I felt kind of like a bit some animosity towards this kid, Alex, when I was 20, and I was like, dude, I'm trying to focus. And I have ADHD. And so together, it was really bad mix. And then I started to learn about these things. So if anyone doesn't know any of these, like some of these definitions, it's okay. But what's helpful is to be able to take some of the training that, like the one I showed you one slide of like the 200 slide thing, that training that we offer, and many organizations offer, because that builds awareness. And then when you have experiential learnings, when you can actually coach someone who is autistic, for example, then you'll get to see how, for example, you might hear bluntness in what they say, and you might have a lot of exactitude. And if you are ambiguous in the questions that you ask, like where will you be in 5 years, and the person is looking at you, lost, trying to understand what you're trying to say, because that is such a vague question, or what are your biggest strengths, which is perfectly okay to know what are your strengths and what can you do better than others. That's the topic of this conversation. But if you use the word greatest, not paying attention, maybe the person is wondering, oh, this is a strength, but this one is another strength, and they're comparing the two. And I don't want to lie to this person because I'm really honest. So I have to tell them which one is the greatest one. Or maybe there's this third one and fourth one. All of a sudden, you've got all these computations happening in the head. And that's not communicated out because they're trying to answer that one question, but that was not the intent. And that is part of the
Yes.
training in not just the interview, in any kind of conversation.
So that, just for a second, because that's really interesting to me. I once had to go and have a conversation with somebody regarding my daughter again, because when she has conversations that are meaningful, because she's thinking so hard, she can't make eye contact.
Mhm.
She looks down and she fiddles. And so that's been taken by people as her not paying attention. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people in the work environment that may have similar challenges, that they fiddle with things when they're talking, and it could look like they're not paying attention. So I'm curious for all the folks here, you could jump in and talk or drop it in chat. From the companies that we represent, are you recognizing this and training for it, or at least recognizing it? Like, I'm curious how, as recruiters, talent acquisition professionals, how are we improving our skill set to identify these things? And Deirdre, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, at our company, we just rolled out something called a competency-based approach, where the idea is that hiring teams can only evaluate people on predefined behavioral competencies as well as the technical requirements. So a person is not allowed to rate somebody on, say, eye contact or a firm handshake or something like that, unless there is a genuine business need where they have defined it in advance of the interviews, at the point where they're developing the job description, to say, this is a need for this position, this is why we're justifying it. And if that's the case, then they can do it. So, if you're a person where you're a receptionist and you have to be able to, show people to do something, then whatever that is, then it's a requirement. But if it's not, and we can't find a reason for it, then it's not allowed to be evaluated. And so that's how we've been able to mitigate some of the hiring bias that comes in that adversely affects people who are, identify as neurodivergent or have, various, ability limitations in terms of seeing, vision, hearing, all of that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great step in doing that. And it creates a kind of safe space for people to, as they're applying for jobs, be themselves. So I think that's powerful. So thank you for sharing that. Is anyone else doing anything in their world to bring a different perspective to the interview and evaluation process? So all right, well, we will move right along. So Roy, one of the things that was a little interesting to me as we were kind of going through this is kind of, let's call it building a superhero culture. So, and I'm thinking the recruiting process was a success. We have brought somebody into the company that has their unique perspective of the world. The question I have is, how do we get the company, not the hiring manager, not the onboarding process, but the company to embrace those unique differences? So, and that's what I see as a superhero culture. It's fostering a community of belonging and acceptance and support. And I'm curious what examples you've seen of that really have stuck out as like, this is a great way of approaching this.
Can I be brutally honest?
Why stop now? Go for it.
Companies are capitalistic, and so they care
Yes.
about money. If you let a company realize that they can get that many more customers, their market increases by another, let's say they only operate in the United States, another 50 million people if they're accessible for the blind and low vision, then that might make them think their marketers come on board, their salespeople come on board, their developers come on board, and the board to come on board. That's 50 million out of 300 million, but that's only the blind and low vision. But then it's more than that
Right.
for the deaf, and it's more than that for the neurodivergent. And all of a sudden, that is the majority, or almost. So then your market doubles or triples. So that is the best part. Okay, great. I'm cool with it. I'm super happy to have at my store, my cafe that I operate, because let's say I'm McDonald's, someone who comes from an underrepresented community, because that is going to signal to all my customers that it's safe and it's acceptable for all members within that community to show up. Wonderful. Now, what do I do? Well, how do I get started? Like, it feels like a mountain to climb to come and say, I'm going to retrofit my offices and I'm going to have to make my digital tools. Like, I'm busy making money right now. So I really like this idea. Now, how do I get it done? So at this point, they go to the head of HR. They ask the head of HR, how do you do this? Or they go to the head of operation and be like, well, I don't know. Head of the CFO will be like, that sounds expensive. And then so they go to the head of HR. And did we ever learn inclusion, accessibility? Let's start with accessibility. You cannot be inclusive if you're not accessible. Let's start with that. And so since we don't know, it's really good to take a course on it, because then you demystify this thing, or bring in a partner that'll say, hey, please take care of all this. Give me one bill. Let me see. Is the cost reward worth it? Goes to the CFO. CFO says, hell yeah, if I can potentially double my clients, and for the cost of what? Just that? Far less than 1% of my, that's way less than that, then the math is just too good to be true. Why? Because A, the government helps. B, because it's far less expensive. Can I demystify this thing by showing you maybe like a couple of slides, like just the accessibility recipe of how simple it can be?
Sure. I think that'd be great. And because that's kind of the question I have is, I've run a number of revenue-based units in companies, and that accessibility, that inclusiveness from historical perspective, looking back, would have almost been met in opposition, because that, we're go-to-market. It's just about how much money. We have a goal, we have a revenue model, and how are you going to execute to get it done?
Yep. Look at this. Most common reasonable accommodation. So I'm going to scare you and then I'm going to make you super happy. It's going to take about 5 minutes and I'm going to go super fast. I've never gone this fast on this before. Whoa. Okay. So people with physical disabilities, you've got ramps and elevators, wider doorways, but just most times they're wide enough. So just audit this thing. Lower desks and workstations, accessible common areas. Chances are you probably already have this, maybe outside the front entrance, to give someone a space. Returning citizens, background check consideration, doesn't cost anything. That's just part of the policy. On-the-job skilling, if you can offer that, that's really helpful, because in prisons you don't have computers, and so you're missing out on quite some things. Flexible work hours and telework in case you're still on parole. Mentorship and counseling, not expensive. Mentorship, by that I don't mean like psychological counseling, just if you want to, you're welcome to, but just mentorship, someone who can make you feel like you belong. And this is good for everybody. So you take this and you're like, okay, cool, that's good for that community, but that's also good for everybody. Refugees, language support, because they showed up in a new place where they don't speak the language, on-the-job training and skill development, some transferable skills from how they did UX and how you do UX. Flexible work arrangement, oh, that's a duplicate over what we just saw. And mentorship and, oh, that also is a duplicate. Okay, you do it once, that works for multiple. Flexible work hours for single parents. Oh, wonderful. So, okay, I'll give that. That helps 4 communities so far. Childcare facilities that are on site or nearby, that is a really cool thing to offer. Allowances for reduction in cost of childcare. You're going to be attracting 450 million people who are single parents. And by the way, that includes people who have shaped our world as we know it, and their children who have shaped our world as we know it, including both Barack and Michelle Obama, and so many other people. Then you've got upfront communication and meeting scheduling, just so that you're not dropping something on somebody. That's super helpful. Oh, but that can also help someone who's highly organized, whether they're neurodivergent or not, or a single parent or not. For the neurodivergent, reduce socializing, noise canceling headset, offer those sensory considerations, such as replacing flickering lights. Like, none of that stuff is expensive. Neurodiversity awareness training, job coaching, and mentoring. Flexible work environment. Oh, we heard that before. Clear communication instructions. Okay, we saw that just a bit. Advanced meeting notices. Structuring work environment of like what channels you use for what. Just clarity, which makes your operation, which makes the CEO really, really, really happy. And probably someone who was in the army or a former military veteran who will appreciate that there are channels for things. Blind and low vision, then here we added the cost just to make you realize that because this is the one where people think that might be the most expensive one. In fact, no, it ain't. Assistive technology, screen readers, magnifiers, a couple of $100, if that. Accessible documents. In that training earlier, if we listened to Jason's next segment, he would have said, just go to accessibility and then press the accessible button in under options. Workplace navigation. So just, well-marked pathways, doesn't cost much. Flexible work arrangement.
Right.
Also doesn't cost much. Deaf or hard of hearing, sign language interpreters. This may be the most expensive part, because it's expensive to have a sign language interpreter. You can't do this for every conversation. So, but the government helps with that. And people who are deaf and hard of hearing do get allowances for this, depending on their location. Amplified telephones, visual alerts, closed captioning, basically, subtitles. Modifications to the workplace, like installing flashing lights, for example. For the LGBTQIA, non-discrimination policies, pronoun and name usage, adding a field in your HR system for pronouns, establishing gender-neutral or inclusive restrooms, so you know where to go and you're not just feeling uncomfortable. Resource groups, that's for all. Training and education, like this one. Healthcare and benefits, if you want to take the extra steps. Okay, that sounds like a lot, right? Maybe not that much, but it still sounds like a puzzle that you've just... All right. What if it looks like this? Inclusive policies. So just in your policy, pronouns and name usage, background check consideration, flexible work hours, remote work options, parental time off, financial allowances. You knock this off in one document. And then you bring it to application. So far, cost nothing. Partnerships, language support, skill development, sign language interpreters, childcare facilities, healthcare, and benefits. Costs a little bit of money, but it's not out of the, we generally offer those kinds of allowances to all employees. So it's just about being a bit more aware about, adding a couple of check marks. All within that same budget per person. You're fine. Workplace modifications, accessible documents, subtitles, workplace navigation, gender-neutral restrooms, visual alerts, ramps and elevators, wide doorways and hallways, lower desks and workstation, accessible common areas. That is probably a little bit expensive, not that much when you think of it. And then the government helps you with a lot of these things. Accessibility tools, noise canceling headsets, visual supports and organizational tools, screen readers, magnifications, amplified telephones, hearing aids, tactiles, and large print keyboards. Also just some tools, like $1,000 for this stuff. Workplace rules, reduce socializing, allow that. Clear communication policy, communication channels, have a D&I expert, and then inclusive programs, mentorship and counseling, training and education, employee resource groups. That's the accessibility recipe that you can, it's a lot easier than I thought it was.
Yeah, and one of the things that, to me, this inclusive programs and the two bottom things, the Employee Resource Group, as a transitioning military veteran coming after a decade of military service, that was incredibly beneficial to me. Because when I walked out of the military, every third word out of my mouth was an acronym. And my view of the world had been shaped in a way that was exceptionally black and white. So for me to work into a professional work environment, being able to communicate with somebody who's made that journey already was very powerful. When it comes to training and education, I don't know how many books I've read to better support my family. And I can only imagine that just one of those short books would have made me a much more valuable and empathetic leader or coworker as we're bringing in these types of superpowers into our organization. So out of the accessibility recipe, those seem to be really, from my perspective, some of the core things that have been very valuable as I've been in the professional world working.
What if you take this, you pass it to someone, you tell them, all right, I'm going to pay this for this one headcount, get a couple of partners, give me the overall cost, take this thing, and then you get X number, go to the CFO, tell them, all right, so sales stands to gain 2X the amount of customers.
Yes. I think that is, I mean, that's,
You do the math.
it's, yeah, I mean, it's a very logical way to go at it. Plus, there's another number of other employer brand benefits, right? So one of the things that we talk about on a regular basis, or I read about on a regular basis, is what candidates are evaluating their future employers based on. This seems to be one of the growing areas that people are starting to look at in terms of the organization's ability to support and help people grow, increase their skills, come into the workforce. And there's a number of groups, as you've mentioned, that really need that help. We've only got a couple minutes left. So Roy, maybe tell a quick conversation on Jobs for Humanity, but if there was somebody who wanted to get more information around this, can they reach out to you, or there are great resources? I'd love for people to walk away with some tools.
Just go to jobsforhumanity.com, add me on LinkedIn. If you want this presentation, we can share it with you. If you'd want to present it in a packaged way and say, hey, you know what, we're actually going to be one of the pioneers, which is going to do what the world ought to do. And we're one of the innovators. And we actually think that it's actually something that leadership will accept. Then let's bring it there. And then we make a case study out of it. And then, go to a few more communities, recruitment communities, and then double that, triple that. And all of a sudden, grassroots led, you've got capitalism meet accessibility, because it fits capitalism and it fits accessibility. And then we can all get along on this one.
That's awesome. Well, everyone, I just dropped Roy's link into chat, so I highly encourage you to connect with him. I have been a major fan of Jobs for Humanity, Jobs for Lebanon since Roy's begun that journey. I think it's phenomenal, and I've always been a huge advocate and supporter of it, because I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. And I'm really excited to see people like Roy taking on these types of challenges. So we've reached 2:00, and I always try to end right on time. So for everyone who came, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time out of your schedule, and thanks everybody for coming. And if anyone has any questions, if you didn't get Roy's stuff, just reach out to me on chat within the Talk platform. And again, thanks everybody for being here. This was a really meaningful discussion for me. So I appreciate it, and we'll talk again next week.